Well, as the 2020 presidential field continues to grow, my next guest says it's shaping up to be, quote, the Democratic primary from hell, end quote. Karl Rove is a Wall Street Journal columnist and former senior advisor to President George W. Bush. Karl, you also say pass the popcorn.
Yeah, it's going to be a heck of a great theater for us. The Democrats have changed the rules and the calendar in four very profound ways. They're going to start earlier. The first Republican debate in 2015 was in August. The first Democratic debate will be in June. And they're going to have a dozen of them before voters go to the polls in February of next year. They're also front-loading the delegates. By March 3rd of 2016, under a quarter of the Democratic elected delegates had been selected in caucuses and primaries. In 2020, by March 3rd, nearly half of the delegates, and by April Fools, 70% of the delegates to the National Democratic Convention will be selected. And they're going to be proportional. So we're front-loading, and their rules of proportionality say that if you get 15% of the vote, you get delegates. They're very proportional. So we're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 candidates who are going to be competing in various states, and 3 or 4 of them are going to end up being above 15% in each of those states. And we're going to have a lot of people fractured convention and may not have a majority on the first ballot as a result of it. And finally, super delegates. They're calling them, incidentally, now the automatic delegates. They're hiding the name. Super delegates are not allowed to vote on the first ballot, but on every subsequent ballot, if there's not a winner, they get to vote. So on the second ballot, imagine 765 sort of senior statespeople of the Democratic Party come roaring onto the field to decide who the Democratic nominee is.
So, Karl, Biden is looking at all of the math and all of these changes that you just laid out, along with some of the other political calculus out there, and everyone's sort of now waiting. Ultimately, the Democratic Party, perhaps now he's seeing maybe as a savior for a party that feels like it's a rudderless ship.
Well, I think that's what he's hoping. I'm not certain that's necessarily what it's going to be. Think about it. We got 2 people sitting here having not entered their contest who are likely to be major players. One of them is Biden, who has the highest name ID of any of the candidates and consistently leads the national polls. Now, he can build on that name ID and that strength, or more likely he can see it diminish as these other candidates get better known. He doesn't need to enter the contest early, which is why he's not in today, but he's got a very tough row to hoe, because once he gets into the race, he better demonstrate some strength, or he's going to rapidly dissipate. The other candidate who's sitting out there is Robert Francis O'Rourke, who's going to likely enter the contest. He's sending signals that he will. Texas is going to be on the 3rd of March. If he runs strong in Texas, he's going to be a player at the convention.
What about some of the other candidates? Kamala Harris, among them, some of the new, I guess, rising stars within the party. Yeah,
look, what's interesting is some of them have had better entries into the race than others. Some of them have done better on the money than expected. Sanders, for example, raised $10 million in 24 hours. Kamala Harris had raised about $1.5 million. But what's interesting is every one of those, with the exception of Sanders, has an early state. Well, Vermont is early, but it doesn't have that many delegates. So every one of them has got a chance to get a big slug of delegates. Massachusetts votes early with Elizabeth Warren, Minnesota with Amy Klobuchar, California with Kamala Harris, Texas with Robert Francis O'Rourke. So, you know, a bunch of these candidates are going to jump into the race and have a contest that could cement their position as a player or sink them if they underperform expectations for their home state.
Karl, you mentioned the super delegates as potential king or queen makers. What about Michael Bloomberg's money, perhaps as much as $500 million? How could that influence this outcome?
Well, he's indicated that he's going to stay focused on 2 issues, climate and guns. He's not indicated that he's going to take an active role in trying to determine who the Democratic nominee. Now, he's got plenty of time to change his mind and enough money to burn a wet mule. So he could be a player, but I think we're likely to see him focus on those issues rather than picking up on any individual candidate with his money. I would expect to see him speak out against some of the sort of far left wing excesses of the Democratic Party, but I'm not certain he's going to back his public statements up with checkbook expenditures.
We've seen the left wing gain a lot of traction and influence already this year in ways that I think are profound. Considering the momentum that they have right now, What does that mean for 2020?
Well, that's the real big test, because there's a divide between the activism of the Democratic base and all Democrats. If you take a look at some of these public polls, for example, more Democrats want somebody who can beat President Trump than somebody who agrees with their views. But that's not the view. That may be the view of all Democrats, but if you look at the activists who participate in these primaries and caucuses, they've got a decidedly more left-wing view. You saw it in the primaries to some degree in 2018, but more importantly, you saw it in 2016 when Bernie Sanders, who had never run as a Democrat for public office, the first Democratic convention he ever attended was the 2016 Democratic National Convention. And remember, he gave Hillary Clinton a run for her money.
He certainly did. Karl Rove, always great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.